Just a low effort, minimally edited video today to give you guys some quick content while I work on long content. As you already know if you read the title, this video is about each modern Persona party member's viability in-game. In other words, how useful they are in combat, not how much I like a character or how well written they are. This is about gameplay only. I am ranking units based on several things, such as move pool, availability, how useful they are against bosses, and how useful they are against random encounters, which I think a lot of tier lists like these just don't factor in. S tier units represent the cream of the crop. They are the party members you should basically always use on your final team. A tier units are very good, and while they might not be quite as busted as S tier ones, they're still very viable, and I wouldn't bat an eye at someone using them on their endgame team. B tier units are fine. They might potentially be useful in certain situations, but will generally lag behind their higher ranked peers. C tier units, meanwhile, are generally not worth using late game, or even before then. Looking at the collection of units below, you can probably see two things. Firstly, that I have two versions of the P3 cast, and Mishima for some reason. Mishima is here to represent Detective Prince Akechi and Robin Hood, while the normal Akechi sprite represents his third semester version. Meanwhile, I've split the P3 cast into a portable/Fez version and a Reload version, as the characters play very differently. Let's start this off with Persona 3 Portable and Fez. Now, I am a portable girly, fancy route forever. However, as numerous Challenge Run videos show, if you know how to use the tactics system, you can get your units to basically do what you want in Fez anyway, so this tier list is probably useful for both versions of the game. Junpei is going straight to B tier. He's not a bad unit by any means. He has coverage for all three physical elements, a very good strength stat, Marukukaja, which raises the party's defense and is one of the better buffs in the game, and single target fire moves. He also has access to counter, which isn't reliable enough to be useful, and a regeneration skill, which is nice but hardly game breaking. His main problem is that in Persona 3 Portable, there is a very clear optimal party, and he's not one of those three units. By the time late game comes around, you want your main damage dealer to be your wild card, not Junpei. If he had innate access to charge, this might be a different story, but as is, he can't compete with the main character, and therefore there's no real point using him once Aigis gets access to her full party buffs. Yukari fares a bit better than her fellow starting party member, and is going into A. She's one of the units you probably want to use on your final team. Why? She's Persona 3's primary healer, and you almost always want a healer on your team in the Persona games. With access to Mipatra, Mediarahan, and Samarakam, she excels at keeping the party alive. She also has a monstrous magic stat, which pairs well with Magarudyne. What keeps her out of S, however, is that's kind of all she does. Her non-magic stats are underwhelming, and that makes it so she's not quite as irreplaceable as Akihiko, who is going straight into S tier. He has a lot going for him. Solid all-round stats, a single target heal, Elec Amp for boosted damage, oh yeah, and every single multi-target debuff move in the game. There is a reason Atlas never did something quite like this again. Because having all the debuff moves on one character is ridiculously busted. Lowering your enemy stats has a profound effect on them, and more importantly, having a dedicated debuff guy means that your wildcard can focus exclusively on offense. There is literally no reason not to use Akihiko. As big of a Mitsuru fan as I am, her combat performance is lacking. I debated on whether to put her into C or B tier, and I think I'll be friendly and put her into B tier. In Portable anyway. In Fez, I think she's a C tier for reasons I'll explain later. Mitsuru specialises in magic attack and status ailments. This isn't Persona 5, however, where technical damage is a thing, so the latter is only really useful in very limited situations. She does her job as a magical attacker far better, thankfully. Her magic stat is very good, and she gets an amp skill along with a multi-target heavy attack. She also gets access to Mind Charge, what Concentrate used to be called for those who don't know. However, in Fez, that's not a good thing. Why? Because Mind Charge is bugged in that game, leading to it actually lowering her overall damage output if used. Yeah. And combined with the fact that physical attacks tend to simply be better than magical ones, there's simply no point using Mitsuru over the Yukari, Akihiko, and spoiler, Aegis core, who is going straight into S. As you might have gathered, Aegis is the inverse of Akihiko, with access to every single full party buff. She also gets access, I'm going to pause here for the plane. Alright, plane's gone, where was I at? She also gets access to a single target heal and revive, along with some powerful physical skills, even if she lacks Junpei's raw damage output. To make up for that, however, she gets access to Ogia mode, which buffs up her damage output notably for a limited time at the cost of becoming temporarily immobile after using it. Not that any of that really matters, as, I'll say it again, she has every single full party buff. While she very much deserves a spot in S tier, I do think Aegis has a big flaw, however. Specifically, her mid-game performance is average. Her elemental coverage is lackluster, and the Hermit Full Moon boss hard counters her. Because of that, you might want to hold off on using her until after that point. Next up is the best boy, who is going straight into B. He's a dual dark and fire attacker with the ability to inflict fear, fire amp, and high counter. While having access to 2 magical elements makes him pretty damn useful at mopping up random encounters, that's the only thing saving him from C tier. His damage output is low due to his poor offensive stats, counter skills are too unreliable to be that useful, and ailments are inconsistent. There's a period of time he's useful in Tartarus, but that's about it. I flip-flopped between putting Ken into B or A, but ultimately, I think he belongs in A, if only just. You can absolutely change my mind on this. Ken is a jack of all trades, with access to pierce, light, and electric damage, and a full party heal and revive. His broad elemental coverage makes him pretty useful in Tartarus, and he can fulfill Yukari's niche of being a healer, which, as I said before, is an important one. I do think that Yukari is ultimately better, however. Why? Part of that is for moveful reasons. Ken's stuck with a single party heal until level 51, roughly 10 levels after Yukari gets her mid-tier full party healing spells. That's a lot of levels. He also doesn't get access to any ailment healing spells. The second thing is stats. While Yukari lacks his elemental coverage, she has almost 20 extra points of magic than Ken does. Ken only notably excels above her when it comes to agility, which isn't bad by any means, as it means his turn order is earlier than hers. But, I don't know, I'd rather have the extra damage. Ultimately though, I can see why people would choose Ken over Yukari, so he also belongs in A, if only by a thread. Last and definitely least is Shinjiro, who is going straight into C. Good lord, I am so glad Reload completely overhauled him, since as is, he is useless. Shinji is a physical attacker with a very good move pool, including charge, which you will not be able to take advantage of as he's barely in the party for a month. Let's just say you're going to have to put in a lot of work in that month if you want to actually do anything with said move pool. So when he joins the team, he has Regenerate, Counter, a mediocre single enemy attack, and that's literally it. I understand that Atlas didn't want to make him too enticing, so players didn't end up putting all their experience towards a unit that doesn't even make it to the endgame, but they were far too successful at that. Now, it's time for me to move on to the Persona 4 gang. Specifically, this is for Persona 4 Golden. Yosuke is joining Shinji in the C tier because while he does have Shinji beat, he is extremely underwhelming for an actual proper party member. He's the jack of all trades on paper and a master of none in reality. His magical damage is eclipsed by all of the magic-based party members, and the same for his physical damage. To add salt to the wound, his move pool is also bad. He gets the Sukugaja buff, which raises the party's agility, and is also the worst buff in the game because unlike attack and defense, it doesn't guarantee that your enemies will miss you. He also gets a single target heal, which you need to go on 5 bike trips for if you want to unlock its most powerful form. And why would you want to do that? And some status ailments in a non-Persona 5 game. His Third Awakening skill is also lackluster compared to most of the others, simply combining Masuku Kaja and Mediarama into one. He has a few good things going for him, such as Brave Blade and Dakaja, but it hardly makes up for all of the mid. Chia is a hard one to place, but I think I'm ultimately going to put her into A, though you can change my mind. While she puts up the pretense of being an ice unit and can get the Harma line of spells if you go on bike trips with her, in reality, she's basically a purely physical party member. With the removal of Persona 3's multiple physical elements, Chia's main gimmick is being a crit unit. While crit units are very good in modern Persona, Chia gets held back a bit by Persona 4 not really having any spectacular high crit moves. On the bright side, however, she does get innate charge access, rapidly boosting her damage output even if you can't get the crit. Her third semester skill, Dragon Hustle, also applies a party-wide heat riser, which is fantastic even if it comes at a very hefty SP cost. All in all, she's solid, though I personally find Kanji a bit more consistent. Yukiko is going straight into S. In fact, I think you could make the argument that she is one of the best party members in the entire franchise. Why? She is Yukari on crack. She gets all of the healing moves, culminating in Salvation, which cures ailments and restores health for the entire party. Except why even bother when you can combine Fire Boost, Fire Amp, Mind Charge, which now works, and Burning Petals, a severe magical attack that damages all foes. She hits like a goddamn truck, and while you do need to max out her bike trips in order to get Mind Charge, it's worth it, especially since you can pick up Matarunda, a useful debuff skill, on the way. There is no reason not to use Yukiko unless you're doing some form of challenge run. Kanji is yet another really good character, even if he has a few faults holding him back from the S rank. He's Chia's counterpart, focusing on raw power and endurance instead of crits. While he doesn't get innate power charge, it unlocks if you do his social link, which you should be doing anyway, and unlike Chia, he gets a proper spread of electrical attacks and elec amp, giving him an edge when it comes to targeting weaknesses. He also gets Mitaru Kaja, one of, if not the best buff in the game, raising the party's attack. While he is more consistent than Chia, as I mentioned, he does have some things holding him back. Firstly, his Third Awakening skill, the Man's Way, which has the potential to down or dizzy foes, is not reliable enough to be useful and can't even affect bosses. Finally, Izanami no Okami, the final boss in the game, resists physical attacks and completely drains electric. Kanji is still worth using, don't get me wrong. You'd probably tear through Izanami if she didn't have that resistance, but I think it's enough to keep him as an A tier unit. Teddy is one of those characters who looks a lot worse than he actually is due to the existence of Yukiko. While he doesn't reach her levels of broken, he's still a really damn good unit, however, and deserves a spot in A. He's the party's actual ice specialist and has a solid magic stat along with the boost and amp skills to improve his damage output. He also serves as an alternative healer with access to full party heals and revives, even if he doesn't get salvation. Teddy's real niche, however, is being one of the only 2 party members outside of the older Persona 3s with access to multiple party-wide buffs, with both Mataru Kaja and Maraku Kaja in his arsenal. He also gets Dekunda early on in his bike trips and Marakunda via his mandatory social link, making him a solid debuffer too. What holds Teddy back is his third awakening skill, Kamui Miracle, as its effects are determined by luck and may end up fully healing the enemy. You can't be an S rank with a skill like that, you just can't be. Naruto is a really hard character to rank, though I think I have to put them in A simply due to their marvellous performance against random encounters. Why are they so good? Because they can get a single target heavy magic spell in every element. In fact, their move pool is nuts. They get physical skills, Hama and Mudo, almighty spells, mind charge, both barrier spells, invigorate, heat riser, and if you're willing to invest time into biking with them, angelic grace, which doubles their evasion against most moves. Also, their third awakening skill, Shield of Justice, protects the entire party from one attack. Naruto's move pool is also their greatest downfall, however, as they really want more than 8 move pool slots. Do you give them coverage at the cost of their support skills? Or do you sacrifice their single target magic spells in favour of relying on almighty damage, which can't down enemies, and slightly unreliable insta-kill moves? As a mixed attacker, Naruto's stats also fall short of their less all-rounded brethren, and the lack of amp or boost skills lowers their damage output further. Naruto is still great, don't get me wrong, but they're no Yukiko. Persona 5 is the first modern Persona game, and the only other one besides older Persona 3 entries to have what I personally believe is an optimal party. Generally speaking, these tiers will apply for both Royal and Vanilla. On the topic of Royal, I won't be factoring in Jasjin skills, as they can be given to any party member, can only be taught once, and cost a time slot, so it's generally better not to need them at all to make a party member viable. In pretty much any other Persona game, Morgana would be an A tier unit. He's the primary healer and has some decent utility options as well, except some bad stats and fierce competition boot him down to B. Let's talk positives first. He gets wind boost and amp, bumping up his power, the desirable salvation skill, and a low accuracy, high crit move which can help him knock foes down. In Royal, his persona trait is also solid, increasing the potency of healing skills with the chance to lower their SP cost. That segues into the bad, however, as late game healing skills always heal you to full anyway. His designated buff/debuff move also affects agility, and while he gets Pulimpa, an ailment skill in a game where they're actually valuable, he doesn't get its multi-target version. The real nail in Morgana's coffin though is his stat spread. His offensive stats are fundamentally mediocre, and he is even squishier than Yukari is. A light breeze will sweep this cat off his feet, and salvation isn't enough to save him. Ryuji is going straight into S tier, and is one of the characters who should be in your final party. He's a strong, bulky physical attacker with innate charge, access to one of the strongest physical skills in the game in the form of God's Hand, Shock Boost, meaning his magical attacks can set up technical combos, and his buff move increases attack, one of the most valuable stats in the game. Oh, and in Royal, he also gets a party-wide charge move. Yeah, like I said, there's no reason not to use him late game. He's good at knocking down foes in random encounters and does big damage to bosses. An follows Ryuji's footsteps into the S tier, being his magical counterpart. In terms of stats, she's the team's premium magic user with the boost and amp combo, a severe multi-target magical damage move, concentrate, and burn boost to get those technical combos. Yes, she's basically Persona 5's Yukiko, except she swaps multi-target heal moves in favour of weakening enemies, with access to sleep, Dekaja, and an attack debuff. Oh, right, and in Royal, she also gets the party-wide concentrate move. Her only problem is that she's a bit on the squishy side. However, if you pair her up with the final S tier Persona 5 party member, that's less of a problem. Okay, we're back to putting people in B tier. Sorry, if everyone was an S tier, nobody would be in S tier. Yusuke, like Morgana, is not a bad unit per se. He's just hopelessly outclassed by Ryuji. Yusuke has the highest attack stat of all of the Persona 5 party members, the counter skills, and the Suku buff. It's clear that he's trying to be a hard-hitting dodge tank, but why rely on something that's ultimately down to chance when you can just charge God's Hand them? And that's Yusuke's chief problem. His moveset lets him down. He really wants innate charge, angelic grace or alley dance, and a freeze boost, but has none of them. Instead, he gets the worst buff in the game, and a series of kinda gimmicky physical attacks that power up when he's being baton passed to. However, against random encounters, you're more likely to want to use magical damage to down them, and it's impossible to even use baton pass against most bosses. Yusuke does have a few things going for him, however. Like I said, his stats are good. Freeze is one of the best ailments in the game, which he can potentially proc with his magic attacks. And in Royal, he gets a party-wide Heat Riser skill, which is really damn good, even if Party Charge is better. As some of you might have predicted, the final S tier Persona 5 party member is here. Makoto is the best supporting unit in the game, hands down. She's a rare case of an actually tanky healer, and while her lack of salvation hurts, it's more than made up for by the rest of her move pool. She gets Dukunda and Marakukaja to increase her natural bulk, and her middling magic stat is alleviated by her access to nuke boost and amp, along with atomic flare, which deals severe damage. On the topic of nuclear, it is one of the best elements in the game, as it is tailored to trigger technical damage against elemental ailments such as burn and shock. Burn and shock, the ailments afflicted by the other two best party members. What really puts Makoto into S tier is her synergy with Ryuji and An, which is only increased in Royal, with her persona trait increasing her allies' chance of inflicting elemental ailments. On the topic of Royal, her third awakening skill is a multi-target debilitate, which is as good as it sounds. When playing Persona 5, the Ryuji An Makoto triad is the best for defeating bosses by a country mile. I just realised I put Prince Akechi before Haru. Whoops. On the topic of Haru though, she is going straight into B tier. Firstly, her moveset is varied in a somewhat messy way. She gets ailment healing and resistance, the Khan's, Heat Riser, and ailment spell, one-shot kill, which is a gun spell with boosted crit chances, and boost and amp spells for both side damage and gun damage. There's a lot of good things individually there. The Khan's great for game if you're familiar with the enemy AI, Tentarafu combos with her Psi magic for technical damage, and the amps in Heat Riser are pretty self-explanatory. Unfortunately, she doesn't have the move slots to take advantage of all those things, like Naruto before her. Like Naruto, she's also missing things she really wants access to as well. Her lack of healing magic mitigates her usefulness as a support unit, meaning you can't replace Makoto with her, and her mid-magic and strength stats hold her back from being a good substitute for Ruji or Arn despite her amp skills. She also doesn't get her best skills until very late in the game, and generally struggles up until that point. There are reasons to use Haru, however. Like I said, the barrier spells can break the game if you know how to use them, and in Royal, she gets access to Lifefall, which is possibly the best move in the entire game, as it repels a single attack on each party member. At the same time, its high SP cost does mitigate its usefulness, and given Persona isn't a super difficult game to begin with, you really don't need to cheese your way through it with reflect damage. I personally found Haru far more useful as a critical hit unit. In the late game, she is very good at triggering all-out attacks. In fact, while the Ruji Arn Makoto core is the best for bosses, in Royal, I would argue that Haru, Sumire, Makoto is the best triad for dealing with random encounters. Sumire and Haru are there to knock those down, while Makoto is there just in case that strategy fails. Akechi is actually the character who inspired me to make this video, because I have not seen a single tier list where I agree with his placing. So Akechi comes in two flavours, Detective Prince Akechi, who's exclusively available in Sai's Palace, and Black Mask Akechi, who's only available for the Royal exclusive Maruki Palace. Let's talk about Prince Akechi first, however. In the first ranking on this list that I think is going to be genuinely controversial, I am putting him into A. I can hear some of you screaming, "Hold on a minute, he's only in the team for one palace, how can he be in A?" And my answer to that is Yuki Mishima. His Confidant makes it so the backup party gets full EXP, and said Confidant is also deliberately designed to be easy to complete. By the time you're up to Sai's Palace, you probably haven't maxed, and therefore, you lose no resources for using Akechi on your team. And Prince Akechi is tailored to be useful in Sai's Palace. He gets access to both light and dark skills, bless and curse skills, which make him very handy against random encounters, especially since for the first time those elements aren't restricted to insta-kill spells. Megidola, Megaton Raid, and Attack Master are all strong skills for the stage of the game he joins, and his lack of access to a full party attack buff or charge/concentrate doesn't actually hurt him that much, since unless you are seriously overleveling, Ruji doesn't have them yet either, and there also isn't a significant difference between their attack stats. So, in other words, if you've leveled up Mishima's Confidant, just add Akechi to the team. You really might as well. If Akechi was a permanent party member, however, this ranking would be very different. The dual elemental coverage and debilitate might keep him out of C, though it would be pretty damn close. On the topic of C, however... Sorry Akechi stans, but his Black Mask version just sucks ass. His moveset contains Fortify Spirit, which is gimmicky, Levitate, apologies if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, a genuinely good physical skill he can't make full use of since he cannot get Charge, Megadoleon, which costs too much SP to be useful outside of boss fights, Debilitate, which would be great if Makoto didn't have a multi-target Debilitate at this point of time, Riot Gun, which is inferior against random encounters compared to one-shot kill, Aigeon, which would be better if it was my Aigeon instead, Attack Master, which is kind of redundant now that you have access to Marakukaja, and Evade Blessed, which is good but doesn't make him shine. To put things simply, Akechi wants to be a heavy damage dealer, but doesn't have the stats or a move pool to keep up with Arn or Ryuji. He's not even that useful against random encounters, since he's stuck to a single target spell on his weaker offensive stat, or gun damage with no boosted crit odds, which, spoiler, most enemies are not weak to. But wait, what about his third awakening skill? Could that be enough to save him? Ha! No. Rebellion Blade does colossal almighty damage to a single foe, and does increased damage to downed enemies. This could have been a really useful skill, except you literally cannot get it until the final day in game, when you have only challenge battles or the final boss left. The final boss that can't be downed. There is literally no gameplay reason to put him on your team over anyone else. Including Sumira, who is going straight into B. If she had joined the team during Shido's Palace, I probably would have put her in A, because while she's not great in boss battles, she has a very useful niche against random encounters. For similar reasons to Prince Kechi, you honestly might as well put her on your team while travelling through Maruchi's palace. On paper, she's a blessed wielder with access to a single target heal, but in reality, Sumira is a dedicated crit character. With innate apt pupil and sword stance, she has a very solid base crit rate, which she can further increase with the use of Brave Step, a unique skill she gets at level 80 which boosts the entire party's crit rate. Her endurance stat is admittedly horrid, but she alleviates that slightly with Alley Dance, which doubles her chance of dodging incoming attacks. Ultimately, she excels against the random encounters in Maruchi's palace, even if she can't reach the Ryuji and Makoto core's height due to the fact that most bosses in Persona 5 are sadly immune to her main gimmick. In fact, Sumira would have been an easy A if she was in Persona 3 Reload. Oh boy. Spoilers. The party members in Reload are really, really good. In fact, they are so good, this is the only game where I legitimately have no idea what the best party composition is, as I want to have basically all of the characters on the field at once. So, let me know, what do you guys think the best Reload party is? I'm keen to hear your thoughts. Reload Junpei is going straight into A. Spoilers, you are going to see a lot of that this round. Like Sumira, Junpei has been retooled into a dedicated crit character. Except unlike Sumira, you can actually crit bosses in this game. Junpei also has access to the thing that makes the Reload cast so broken, namely Theurgy. In Junpei's case, I specifically mean the characteristics that are associated with Theurgy, which boost his crit rate and power. While he's not as consistent as the other physical attackers in the game, if he gets a crit, Junpei is doing a ton of damage. Looking at his moveset, Reload doesn't make any particularly substantial changes to it, except for the fact that Spring of Life, his unique passive, is now one of his Theurgy skills. On the topic of Theurgy, here's fine. Hagen Blast syncs well with Koromaru, and can rack up some crazy damage, while Blaze of Life restores his HP to full, which can be situationally useful. Not the best Theurgys in the game, but not bad ones either. Ultimately, Junpei is worthy of a slot on an endgame team, even if he's not mandatory. Yukari is going straight into S tier. Why? Because on top of being a healer, her new characteristic quarters the cost of healing skills when raised to its max. She can throw around Diarahans like they're candy. That's not the most busted thing about her Theurgy, however. No, she gets access to Tranquility, which is a party-wide concentrate. And for some unfathomable reason, Alice made it so Chars and Concentrate work on Theurgys. Unlike in the older versions of Persona 3, Yukari is also able to do more things than just wind magic and healing now. Pilimpa and Poison Mist have both been added to her arsenal, which like all non-Persona 5 ailments are situational, but not bad. She also gets an agility debuff, which is the weakest of the debuffs, but can be useful when battling Golden Hands, for example. If someone said that Reload Yukari is the best Persona party member, I would believe them. She's just that damn good. After some internal debate, Akihiko is going into A. Sadly, he's one of a few characters that Reload actively nerfed. In fact, his moveset has pretty much been completely overhauled. Instead of being the debuffer, he's now a jack of all trades specialising in strike and electric damage. That's not bad, however, the fact that he trades all 3 debuffs for Masuku Kaja is. Seriously, he would have been so much better if he literally got either of the other buffs. Masuku Kaja isn't all terrible, however, due to his characteristic, which is both Akihiko's greatest boon and bane. It significantly increases the effect of buffs on him, to the extent that as long as you have an attack buff, he is one of the game's best damage dealers. That, on the flip side, is also the problem. You need to constantly keep him buffed, which isn't always convenient. His ultimate weapon alleviates this slightly by giving him auto heat riser, but getting said weapon requires fusing Mara, which is only available at level 75, and then grinding it until it gives you a Mara's head. This is a pain in the ass, and means you're likely only going to get his weapon by the time you're fighting the next avatar. He has a lot of potential, but is just too finicky to use to earn that S tier. God, I'm sorry that I have to do this to you, Mitsuru, but realistically, you're a B. She loses some of her support skills in favour of focusing more on ailments, which is ultimately a net positive but still nothing special, and more importantly, gets Marakunda, one of the best debuffs in the game. As within the older Persona 3s, she's a magical attacker, which is still ultimately worse than being a physical one, especially since you can crit bosses in this game. On the topic of magical attack, she actually gets some good tools in Reload, and some bad ones. The biggest positive is that Concentrate actually works now, and she gets the severe magical spell Diamond Dust. On the bad side, she loses Ice Amp, and her Fiergies are meh. Her first one is Blizzard Edge, which simply does single target ice damage, but the one I really want to talk about is her second, Blade of Execution. It does massive almighty damage to a single foe and applies Debilitate to them. It's not bad by any means, except for the fact that it's not an ice move and therefore doesn't benefit from her ice boost. Plus, while damage and Debilitate is good, quite frankly, it pales in comparison to the other supporting Fiergies by a country's margin. If Atlas had taken a page from Makoto's spellbook and turned it into a low-damaging Omni-Debilitate, Mitsuru probably could have narrowly squeezed herself into A rank, but as it stands, there's really no point using her late game over everyone else. Next up is our favourite robot, who is going into A. While she has been nerfed slightly, losing access to her agility buff, unlike Akihiko, she maintains her more important attack and defense buffs. She also loses access to Samara Calm and Slash coverage in favour of some ailment and damage resistance passives, along with Enduring Soul, which lets her survive a single fatal attack. Unsurprisingly, Orgia mode has been turned into a Fiergi skill, with the other being a strong strike attack. Her characteristics, however, are more interesting, and give her a straight buff to her physical moves. All in all, she manages to be a tanky hard hitter with great support options, who might have slightly lower damage output than a critting Junpei or a fully buffed Akihiko, but in return, she's far easier to use. She does have a big problem, however, and that's that she synergizes poorly with Yukari, the best unit in the game. Aegis has no magic, and therefore can't take advantage of Yukari's party-wide concentrate, and they both share an electricity weakness. It's a bummer because this limits Aegis's viability. Koromaru is going straight into A. Holy hell, this dog got a buff. Firstly, the I-Her line of spells now exists in this game, so he doesn't have to rely on insta-kills for his dark damage. He also loses his relatively useless counter skills and Evil Smile in favour of boosting his offense with Virus Breath, an almighty attack that may inflict poison, and some physical coverage, including Getsue, which which is notable because it increases its damage on a full moon. In a game where all the boss fights happen on the full moon. Yeah. Koromaru also gets some extra support options, including Revolution, Masuku Kanja, Debilitate, and oh yeah, the party-wide charge skill. The party-wide charge skill that he can use the second he joins the team. Unfortunately, however, his late game performance is a bit dicier. Tempest Slash is his best physical skill, which pales in contrast to the moves other physical wielding party members are throwing around, and therefore, he can barely take advantage of his own power howling. He doesn't get Debilitate until the late 70s, and finally, his offensive stats are still lackluster compared to the more offensively geared units. He's still not bad by any means, however, and does have a place on endgame teams. Ken joins the majority of the Reload units in the A tier. Like I said, the party members in this game are all good. Like Koromaru, he's received a fairly substantial move pool overhaul. He still gets both light and electric damage, trading some of his insta-kill capabilities for the more reliable Koga spells. In general, he trades some of his offensive power in favour of improving his support, getting both Khans and Heat Riser. On the topic of Khans, he also gets access to one of the best Theurgy skills in the game. Divine Intervention, his awakening skill, is nuts! Why? It fully revives and heals the party, which would have been good enough alone, but on top of that, it also applies Haru's life wall to the party. In fact, Divine Intervention is so broken against certain super bosses, such as the Reaper, Ken outperforms Yukari, one of the best characters in the franchise. Admittedly, Divine Intervention is so overkill, you'll almost never actually need it, but if you find yourself struggling against the boss, try adding Ken to your team. Sadly, however, Ken has a major flaw that holds him back from getting that coveted S tier. That is the fact that he burns through his SP way too quickly. Barrier spells cost 55 SP. At the same time, as game-breaking as they are, you really don't need to rely on them outside of challenge runs. The problem is that Meteor Arhan costs 40 SP, and unlike the Khans, you do actually want to use it. While Ken's characteristic gives him some SP back each turn, when a fight starts getting long, and boss fights can get long in this game, you run into a very real SP management problem. Because you want Ken's SP low to charge his Theurgy quicker, but he also becomes useless if it's too low. Combined with the fact that SP restoratives are hard to get your hands on, Ken falls just short of the S tier finish line. Last and potentially least is Shinjiro again. I spent a lot of time debating whether to put him into A or B, but I think I'm going to go with B. Atlas took a page from Prince Ketchi's book for him and made Reload Shinji really good. He starts off with a solid selection of physical skills, along with Endure and a new Reload exclusive move, Bloody Charge. It costs a hefty chunk of HP to use, but as the name implies, gives him charge on top of boosting his crit rate. Losing his HP isn't even really a negative, since his Theurgy charges faster when his HP is low. Oh right, and his characteristic boosts his stats. All in all, Shinji hits like an absolute truck, especially at the point of game you get him. In fact, if he was a permanent party member, the only thing holding him back from S tier would be his poor synergy with Yukari. So, why am I putting him in B then? The answer is that unlike in Persona 5, where you simply have to level up a confidant, a thing you should be doing anyway, to get party-wide experience, to raise an underleveled party member back up to snuff in Reload requires using Twilight Fragments. And Twilight Fragments are in very short supply unless you're willing to spend a ton of time grinding. The other thing holding him back is his lack of elemental coverage, and the fact that he needs to spend a turn setting up to get access to a boosted crit rate, and realistically, you want to defeat any random encounters you battle on the first turn. To be fair, it probably is still worth using Shinji for the limited time you have him, but he's got a few problems which Prince Akechi simply doesn't. And that's all, folks. If you've watched the video this far, do me a favour and press that like button. And if you want to see more Persona and JRPG content, consider giving me a sub. And tell me, who do you think the best Persona party members are?